interpretation of a producer, a definition I think that will hold up almost any place in the world. Basically, the producer is in charge of the session. He can be likened to a director of a film. So that ideally the producer, before going into the studio, sort of hears it in his head the way that he wants it. He is the overall musical director of the recording session. So the producer is the person that kind of conceives the basic idea. He's the architect of the session. He's the person that puts it all together in terms of artistry with the science of recording. And the producer is standing in the middle of a situation of being on his right side is the artistry, and on his left side is the reality of the record world. Okay? So he's the middleman between the art and the commercialism. Okay? Now, who hires the producer? How y'all doing? Y'all look so serious. Everything going okay? It's a cram the first week, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty intense. But it's, look at the book, and I've read the book. It can be pretty hairy, but it's good to have. And even if you only use a small percentage of the real technical stuff, it's a fine experience. I know it's scary, but believe me, as you get into the heart of the workshop, which is next week, it'll all start coming together. And it's like I may have said this before, but being an engineer is a little bit like learning how to ride a bicycle. You get on the big two-wheeler. When I was 5 years old, I got on my sister's bicycle. Remember the bikes had big, thick tires? Whatever happened to those? Anyway, that's what it was. And I got on her bike, and I did this, and there was nobody really to help me. Well, she was at school. I was trying to learn how to ride a bike, and I remember I fell down, off the curb. Chillicote's got curbs about that tall. And I fell down and I hit my head, and I'll never forget that when that happened, where it happened, and what went through my mind. 5 years old, and I thought, it was a terrible experience, and it really hurt. But I decided after that happened, after it really smart, after it kind of cooled down, that I was going to learn how to ride that bike, and so I got up and I did the very same thing, and I did that for like 2 or 3 days. I was walking like. But then one day I woke up and I got on the bike and I rode it like I'd always been riding, and that's the way getting the knowledge of the equipment and applying it to a practical situation of how to work with people. The equipment is for the people. All that equipment is there for the purpose of music. It is a conduit for art. Remember that, because as the technology increases, as the consoles get from bigger to smaller, so one of these days, you can get a Radio Shack, pay down $39 and have your own home recording studio. That'll happen. 20 years from now, that'll be the case, where all of it will be available to the consumer. Attach it to your TV. Yeah, you're gonna be able to make records, and the thing about it is, the talent that lies within your mind and your ear is irreplaceable and can never be replaced by a computer or by electronic chip. The thing that makes music great is not machinery. It's like all it really is just a camera taking a picture. You can't give credit to the cameraman for the camera for capturing a scene of a tree. That's inspired creation. And that's the same thing with recording. All this equipment is just a conduit, and we're the most important link in that conduit. And I stress that. At the same time, you got to know how to physically operate it. And again, it's like a bike. A lot of details thrown at you, but you stay with it, and you'll have it in about 2 or 3 more days. I mean, as soon as you start getting in there and sitting behind the board doing sessions on a repetitious basis, then you'll pick up. I tell people this: if I can learn to engineer, just about anybody can, because I have a basic spastic factor that's been there all my life. Average intelligence. But one thing I've done that was right is I've always done what I've enjoyed, and basically I've won because of that. And if you get involved in these sessions, you'll find that it's a fun thing. You go in the studio and time flies, man. It's just great. It's another world. It's like another dimension or something. You go into a studio and there's no time. It just goes by real quick. So as a producer, you're standing in the middle between technology on your right hand side and the the artistry, which is also you've got to combine the art with the science, and you've got to again take this over to the other side and relate it to the record buying public. What does the public want? You know what I mean? And you have to work through record companies. You have to work through you got to think, what's that sucker going to sound like on the FM station or on the AM station? Even worse, driving down Interstate 70 with traffic going past the guy. What's it going to sound like? Is he going to be able to hear the most important part of the song? So the producer is really, to me, the most important person in the session. And I really say that with respect to engineers because, to me, the producer has got to hear it all before he goes into the studio, pretty much within the range of the production. Now, the role between the producer and the engineer is such that the engineer, this is a very good definition of an engineer. An engineer is someone who's a person who gets the sound. He's the person that gets the sound that the producer wants. You know, so I say what the producer wants because it really goes back to that. All the responsibility of the session finally goes upon the producer. If it's a hit record, the producer's rich and famous. If it's a flop, then he's as good as his last record, which was a flop. So his career is based upon his last record. That's the way it goes. And there are different philosophies in producing, in guiding the session. Now, let me specifically tell you what the producer does physically and specifically. Number one, he books the studio. He schedules the studio.
This is the engineer?
This is the producer. He chooses or schedules the engineer. Okay, a lot of independent engineers these days, especially real successful ones who have had hit records, who can go from one studio to the next. Okay, the producer books the studio. He books the engineer, decides the engineer. He books the musicians. Now, there's two kinds of sessions. You can put this to the side. There's two kinds of sessions. There's number one, the self-contained band session. And then number two, there's a studio player session, studio musician session, engaged studio musicians. So obviously the band, like Styx, let's say, they're a self-contained band. But if you hear violins on their record, you know that they're not playing violins, right? They've engaged studio musicians. So there's two types of musicians involved. There's a for hire studio musician, and there's a self-contained band. So the producer will engage the musicians if they're for hire. He will say, be here at such and such time. He will take care of all the paperwork for the union. I can't remember the number, 3 or 4. He chooses the material. He picks the material. Okay, that's a very important part of a country producer. You know, country music producers pick the material for the artist. The artist really doesn't always know what songs are right for him or her, so they depend totally on the producer. Now, in rock, it's a little different. You know, Linda Ronstadt probably picks half her songs. You know, Peter Asher probably picks the other half. Okay, next item is that the producer chooses the arrangement. You know, you can take any song and you can arrange it in 1,000 different ways. I mean, if they can take Lucy's theme and make it into disco, you know what? They can make any music anywhere in any style. So arrangement, there's 1,000 different arrangements. You had one little guitar, that may change the arrangement completely. Or you have the bass drum kicking on every beat, you can change it completely. So the producer has to make the choice of the arrangement. Next, he chooses the particular take. You know, you may run down a song 5 or 6 times in the studio, and you have to have someone to make the decision as to which one is the keeper. So the producer has ultimately got to say, okay, that's it. We're going to work with that track. Let's go on to the next song, or let's start over dove. Okay, the producer chooses the sound of the studio. He chooses the studio when he books it, but he also chooses the sound in the studio, and that means he decides how he wants the sound of things to be. So he'll let the engineer typically get the drum set up, mic set up, and get a drum sound. But then he may say, the producer will say to the engineer, I like it, but can you give me a looser snare drum sound? Can you give me a fatter snare drum sound? So the engineer gets off his duff, or he has his assistant go out there and move a mic or loosen snares. Or he may say to the drummer, can you loosen the head of your snare drum so it's more of a bassier sound? So it's very important that the producer gets the sound that he wants. Yeah.
So the engineer has nothing to do with mic placement?
Everything. See, here's the way it is. The engineer is the cook. Okay? He's the cook, but the producer's the chef. So the chef will tell the cook how to cook it, and he'll say to him, here's the way I work. I will let the engineer I say, give me the sound that you think is best for this. And then once he's done what he thinks is his best, I will say, okay, I like this, I'm very positive about it, but I'd like you to change one element of it. So it's the engineer's responsibility to get the sound that the producer wants. Remember, the engineer is for hire, he's paid by the hour. He does the project and he's gone, and that's it. But the producer has to carry that project all the way from the artistry to the buying public, which means he's got to go through the record company that's paying him. And he has to please them as well as who he thinks is going to buy the record. So he's really between a rock and a hard place. He's got a major responsibility. And if a producer puts out 2 or 3 albums that are dead, then his career possibly could be shot with record companies. I mean, at least his reputation as a producer. It's like making movies. If you're a director and you have a couple bad films, then the major studios won't let you make any more. So you got to be right on it as much as you can consistently. So these are some specific things that the producer does, and he's got to keep in mind, that it's all a bit of a combination of art and science, and that's a very tough road to go. Because, for example, we're going to get into listening criteria here shortly, and when you're judging a track, whether you're going to keep it. Let's say you're listening to a track on a playback, and there's one little slight mistake in the timing of it. Where the drummer was maybe a little bit off. The producer has got to make the decision whether that mistake was big enough that they should redo it, or was the track such a great feel, except for one little place, maybe we should keep it. So he's got to decide between a technical point of view as opposed to, a feeling point of view. And it's a continual, it's a continual judgment that the producer's got to make. See, if you take too many takes, what will happen to the band? You'll burn them out, man, and they'll sound sterile. On the other hand, what will happen if it's too loose sounding and it's just with great feeling? People will say, hey, those guys got great feeling, but they're not a very good band. They're not very tight. So you take a band, to me, like the Cars, you get a very tight band. You're hip to what they do. They are very tight. Those guys are studio cats. I mean, they've been playing studio. They play it. You play in the studio with a different touch. How many musicians here? What you learn in the studio, the more you can record, the better musician you'll be, is because you will learn to play for the tape. Because tape is a different medium than playing live, where you have endless dynamics and people will forgive you for being a little out of tune. On record, they won't forgive you for being out of tune. It's a different medium. It's like being on TV. If you be on TV, when you're on TV, you look a little fatter than what you look when in real person. So there's a distortion of sorts, and there's an effect that record will have on your playing. And most musicians learn this as you get in the studio. The more work you do is to learn to play simplified. You listen to the Yes, and you take away all the basic, all the fills and everything, and they're still playing very basic. Or who I consider a great band, Gentle Giant. They play very basic, but they just have a lot of basics on top of each other. And it can get complicated, but really it's simplified when you listen to it. Basically as animals that we are, basic natural listening intuition that we have, we basically go with the melody and we go with the beat. And a record has got to have something in it that will latch onto. And some people call this a hook. And you can write this down if you want to. You should at least have the term. A hook is a certain phrase, melodic or lyrical, that will catch your attention through repetition. So that, you ever hear a song that you hate, but you still sing it to yourself? Jingles for radio and TV are a classic example of hooks drove into the ground, over and over and over. Dr. Pepper's got a great one out right now. That's fabulous. I mean, it sticks to me.
Slim Whip.
There you go. There you go. Slim Whitman's doing really good right now. You know, he had put out his first 45 in 5 years. It just come out. Any Slim Whitman fans in? Okay, what is a record? Okay, a record is a combination of, let me just make it a formula. Write down record equals, number one, it equals a song. Okay, in a record you will hear a song. And in parentheses, for song, put lyrics and melody. So there are some instrumentals out, but let's talk about 95% of the mainstream Mexican song that has words to it. So there's words and music. Song equals record, record equals song plus arrangement. You have to have an arrangement for that song. Plus the sound of the studio. The physical sounds that you hear. The sound of records is getting better. It's getting better and better. I can hear a record and almost tell you that within 2 years when it was recorded by the sound of the bass alone, because it's gotten so good. Remember the Beatles records? Did you ever really hear the bass in the Beatles record? Hey, Paul McCartney's the world's greatest bass player. Great, let's listen to him. And you don't hear nothing, man. You hear a bass tone, but you don't hear a distinctive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Plus, it equals the performance of the artistry or the artistry. To make a great record, you got to have a great artist. You have to have a great sound. You have to have a great song, and you have to have a great arrangement of that song. And granted, you don't have to have 100% on each one of these. Let's face it, the early Beatles records were bad fidelity, At the time, they were state of the art, but the state of the art has improved. You just can't compare today's sounds to sounds 10 years ago and expect it to be as good, So, but at the same time, I believe that Paul McCartney could have recorded yesterday with just an acoustic guitar in front of a cassette recorder, pressed it from a cassette, and I think it still would have been a great, great record. I think that you can transcend certain things. For example, if you can have a great song and a great arrangement and a great performance, but an inferior sound, it still may sell, especially if it's a named group. Listen to Rolling Stones records.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The drum sound is not always a great sound. From when they started to even now, technically, it's not a great sound. And I'm a Rolling Stones fan, but technically, they're not a great band. Technically, they're bigger than as a group. They're all inspiring. But really, I wouldn't want the drummer playing with me on a session. For production because he's doing his own style, and he's not a super active musician. Listen to Creedence Clearwater. They sold more records than anybody during their time, but those guys are terrible. You could probably go up to one of these little bars here and find a better band and put a better band together. But what made their records great? Think about it. It's the material. It's a great material. And the singer had an effect in his voice that people will never forget. But the same drum lick all the way through on all their songs. The guy knew 3 notes on the bass guitar, and his guitar licks were real simplified. You can learn them at Jim's Music Lane, what they got to play on the guitar. So there's an effect that they had there that people like. There's an energy. People will buy records for energy. It's that simple. They want to have an emotional experience with the recording. When you go out and lay down $6 or $7, man, you're looking for an experience. We're music junkies, right? I've got records how many records have you got in your collection too that you listened to one time? How many people are like, man, they got the record, they got 3 or 4 stacks. They probably have 600-700 records. I don't know if anybody's that crazy on it.
Yeah.
When you go on the cutout section, you go through the cutout section, you're hooked when you start going through cutout records.
When you go to records exchange too.
Or recycled records?
So, let's face it. Let's talk about your career as a music person. Let me give you the following symptoms of being a music person. You got an extensive record collection with a lot of bad records in it. You bought because the cover looked good, right? Or their first album sounded great,
So you buy what they did.
Yeah.
So record
Or another symptom is, you go to bed at night listening to music. right? Okay. Or you wake up in the morning listening to music. Or you will, in spite of some of the production, you'll watch the midnight special, right?
Yeah.
One of the most, the top selling group right now in the world has sold more records than anybody.
But yeah.
How many people like ABBA?
I do.
What they do, they do.
How many people really like ABBA? Raise your hand. I mean, this is not an indictment or anything. We're not. Okay, now here's the point. Here's the point we're making. Now, we've had 5 or 6 hands and maybe a group of 70 or 80 that have admitted publicly, you know what I mean? That you like ABBA. But yet the world has embraced them with more votes than the Beatles. That's true. I mean, that's true. That's a true statement. Now, we got to analyze this as producers. We got to figure out why do those guys so? What is it about ABBA that makes them so?
They feel
The masses are going out there. They got something in their music that people like.
Girls, they've got the incredible. You're listening to a song of theirs and you'll be humming it after listening to it once. It's happened to me. I hate them. I think they're like too sugary for me. But I went to see a movie of theirs, which was really well made. Really well made. It was a 90-minute commercial for them. And the hooks, they were so infectious that I was just humming them after I'd seen the movie.
See, that's what it does to me too. I mean, they're very slickly produced. But you know something? It's like when disco first came out, I was opposed to it,
Yeah.
And then I wasn't never into the scene as far as, going to discotheques and buying clothes and looking like John Travolta. As far as trying to figure out how to produce them, there's an art in any music form.
Yeah.
And as engineers and as producers, I mean, we can be condescending as hell and say, hey, man, I'm above Creed's Clearwater. I'm above ABBA. I'm into freeform, man. I'm into Pat Metheny type sound, I'm into the Yes, or I'm into Joan. I'm really into hip sounds, man. But when it really comes right down to it, it's a real talent to make any kind of record and to make it so that people like it. Mickey Mouse Goes Disco. You heard that record? That sold 1 million records.
That's the ultimate.
That sold 1 million copies. And something, you listen to it, and you all of a sudden put away the idea that you're a sophisticated person. This is for little kids, and you get away from that and look and listen to it objectively. It's great. It really is.
Yeah.
I went out to I was at MCA recording in California. I went into the studio and had a big console, and they had it looked like 60 musicians out there. Ball hitter, violin players, and everything. They had the full blown thing. I got to stop saying it because one of these days, you know what I mean? But they were doing Hanna-Barbera cartoon music. There I was. I finally arrived. But I watched the session for about an hour, and I'm telling you something. They had it down. I mean, I watched the producer. He had a score in front of him, and he was counting down, and he would even kind of direct the conductor from the glass. And it was I appreciated it. I heard some mistakes. But, they're like the guy told me, this is for kids. It's not got to be perfect, but it's got to be quick and clean, And if it got a little dirty, it was all right because it's for TV and for, it's background stuff. It's not upfront stuff. But in that, I watched what he was doing. And as a producer, watching the producer, I really respected the guy. And the musicians, these are the same people in the Los Angeles Philharmonic, I mean, these cats were class musicians out there playing cartoon music. And what happens is, when you take a guy like Steve Gadd, who's a great drummer, right? You hip to Steve Gadd?
Yeah.
That cat has done, commercials for Pepsi Cola.
He's done sessions for anyone.
He's for hire. He's a professional in that he doesn't emotionally get involved in the music before the session or after the session. Now, when he's into the session, he's into it. And, I'm going to play you a tape of something I produced. And the girls that sing background on this music are just incredible talents. And they come into the studio. They don't know what they're going to be doing until they get in there. You play the tape for them. They hear a part of it, and then they do it. And that's the way musicians work. And those 2 ways musicians work. Number one is they do head arrangements. Okay, you work with a group of musicians or a musician. The person is either going to do a head arrangement, or number 2 is going to do a score arrangement. Now, obviously, when you're working with a rock and roll type sound, or you're engaging a country musician, the guy's going to do a head arrangement. That he conceives it on the spot. Okay.
Joe?
As a producer, you can say, I don't like that, change it. He may. Yeah.
Head arrangement and what else?
A score.
The score, yeah.
Now, obviously, when they recorded the music for Star Wars, they didn't get all these guys in from the London Symphony and said, hey, just play what you feel, guys. We'll jam it out. You do a Jimi Hendrix lick here. You know what I mean? It would have been total chaos. So what happens is, on score music, the arranger becomes the guy that writes the part. The guy that writes the part is really, he's really the most important musician in the whole thing. He's like the, it's his sound. So now there's another type of arrangement, a third arrangement. That's a combination of the head arrangement with score arrangement. The Beatles, all the Beatles music that has orchestra in it, that's what that is, number 3. They've gone in, they've cut the rhythm section, okay, and they've made their tape, and it sounds pretty good. They give a tape of it to George Martin, and George Martin sits down on the spot. They say, I've heard people that's worked with him say he sits down on the spot, the sucker starts doing all this. Some people can hear that stuff in their head. I don't know anybody here like that? Hear all those parts? They just write it.
Not gonna understand.
They write, you know, with the woodwinds in mind, with the strings going. They just write, you know. Well, it takes a real talent. Anyway, he wrote up the string parts or the brass parts, or whatever, and he gave it to the orchestra, and they overdubbed onto the rhythm section Beatles cut. Now, you all understand in recording, there's 3 types of recording. There's live recording. That's when the band is physically in there cutting rhythm. Okay. Number 2, there's overdub recording. That's when you take in your rhythm track and you're adding, for example, another guitar line or a synthesizer. And in overdubbing, there's a term called sweetening. Okay, we're going to sweeten this track. I think it's a wimpy term, but that's what they call it. We're going to sweeten this track. And sweetening implies overdubbing of strings, vocals, backup vocals, that is, synthesizer, percussion. Okay. When they say we're going to sweeten this track, it implies we are going to overdub, you know, basic fill type sounds. Backup voices, synthesizer, strings, woodwinds, brass. Okay, the third aspect recording. These are obvious things you should know, but I reiterate, remix. So we take all the things you recorded and you essentially play back to your console and do your final blend and your mixing. Now, let's talk about your rhythm section. What does the rhythm section comprise of? What instruments? Okay, well, let's get over one thing right now. Let's make it quick and clean. It's very rare will you record one musician at a time. It happens maybe 1.001% of recording sessions. People say, well, do you record the bass first and then add the drum? No, you don't. That's usually the wrong way of recording. What you do is you record the rhythm section first, and that comprised of drums, bass guitar. I'm talking about a typical pop, so-called pop session. That includes rock and jazz, you know, current jazz and stuff like that. So we're talking about pop recording. We're not talking about orchestra recording. Where in orchestra recording, you record live. There's no overdubs, okay? But in pop, typical pop rock recording, there's rhythm sections, bass, drums, piano, and guitar. And with that includes scratch vocal. Scratch vocal. You all know what a scratch vocal is? Okay. Someone else has already told you during the workshop. Scratch vocal is performed by a singer only so that the rhythm section can build their phrasing and their playing around that voice. What would happen if you didn't have the voice in the song and cut to the rhythm section? Okay, they'd lose their place probably in the song. And the other thing is they would step on the singer. So the musicians essentially are supporting the voice. In just about all songs where there's a singer, the voice is the main thing. And the band is supporting that voice. Now, you can always take that voice back in the mix where, like in a lot of the Stones records, you can't even hear the words. You're just pulling back, you know. And that's just the mix sound. But when they're doing it, they're probably listening very carefully to the voice so they know where to put the roll and stuff. Yeah.
Why do you think they do that?
Because their approach, I believe, you're asking why they turn his voice down. Their approach is they're a band sound. And that he's just, his voice is an instrument in effect, and it's not, if it were Mick Jagger, as an artist, then it would be different. But they probably feel, just speculating out, that he's a unit, he's part of their unit, and that that they're a band. That's part of the band sound. In producing, you'll take a band approach versus an artist approach, single artist approach. Anne Marie Records, her voice is way up front. You can hear every little squeak and succulent sound of her voice. But if, you listen to Fleetwood Mac, and when a lot of times the lead voice of the lady singers is down a lot. Some Fleetwood Mac, there's a lot of bass drum. Mick Fleetwood has mastered the bass drum. I'm giving him credit, man. Yeah, he really has. That's great, and that's his sound. Fleetwood Mac's one of my favorite bands. How many people like the latest album? I like to get opinions of your. How many people don't like it? How many people don't like it? You just are disappointed. Something? I study music from a what I call common sense point of view that I try to take in a session. You listen to Fleetwood Mac, at least I interpret it this way. When you take out the electric in Fleetwood Mac, take it out. Just say someone come along and shut down the breaker on the electric box and they had no amps. The guitar player is incredible. Buckingham's incredible. Okay, but take that away. What you got? What kind of music you got? What kind? Okay, and the music styles that we know. What would it be? Well, it's folk music. Yeah. Unreal, isn't it? Now you think about that. It's country folk. But what's made it unique is the girls' voices. They're singing it, in authentic rock style, blues. There's a blues feel in their voice. But they're also that bass line is what brings it out of that folky age. But that, except for their novelty songs, this new album to me is like there was the melodic songs, and then there was some funny songs, novelty songs. I couldn't take them serious. About half the album was novelty. Throw those away, which I think, in my opinion, I don't like them. But the others that were left are basically country folk songs.
How much did they spend on them?
Well, I know that it was 2.5 years coming out, and I've heard that they spent $1 million, which I wouldn't doubt. When you got limousines running out front while you're waiting to do your section, and you get catered and stuff like that. I mean, it's extravagant living. It's see, the thing about music, it's show business, and the thing about show business is that it's real easy to get into it as a way of life. You can take it real damn serious, and all of a sudden, it's a way of life, and and it's okay for people that can do that and survive. But I think it's a lot of bullshit myself. Yeah. I mean, after a while, man, you're 40 years old and you got kids, and you start thinking, this ain't going on forever. I mean, I that's one thing I like about McCartney. He's pretty down to earth family type of guy, and he goes in and makes his records. I don't think he can't take himself too serious at some of his work. You know what I mean? I'm real opinionated, but you got to be. And I'm just, we'll keep people, as you get into different music, it's always a matter of opinion. It always boils down to that no one is an expert. Anybody that tells you that they're an expert in anything, that they know everything, just get in your car, take off as fast as you can. You know what I mean? The expert syndrome has run wild. And whether it's your doctor who says, I got to perform an operation on you to take your heart out, or whether it's someone that says, listen, I'm an expert psychiatrist, you're nuts. Or I'm an expert mechanic. On major issues, get a second opinion, get a third opinion. Doesn't hurt a thing. 50% of the surgery today is unnecessary in hospitals. Yeah. There's a lot of false pride in the professions. You know what I mean? I'm a doctor. Don't tell me what's right or wrong. There's a lot of that. There's a lot. These guys go 7 years to college and do their internship. People respect them, right? And they're put up on, and they start believing they're impressed. The rock musicians do the same thing. Everybody's yelling and screaming for me, and they start believing that shit. And what happens is when they don't like them anymore, what's the big result? Big Depression time. Anybody read the things about John Travolta? I'm not singing him out to be offensive, but what purportedly has happened is, when he was a big success, he was happy, and then when he came out with the movie with before that, when the moment by moment, it was a big fizzle. He was depressed, and now that Urban Cowboy is supposed to be a great movie, he's supposed to be happy again. Come on now. Life shouldn't be like that now, should it?
No.
We shouldn't measure how much we like ourselves by the way other people like us, that's a big mistake. And I'm philosophizing a bit, but I'm just saying that it's best for you to become open-minded and always realize the way it is in the world. No one is, no, we're not going to be appreciated always. And whether you're a musician or a songwriter, you're going to get rejected, or an engineer, producer. People are going to say, "Hey, I really don't like what you're doing. I think it's, I think you got bad taste there or something." But what you got to learn to do is just blow it off. Can't take it serious. You can't take anything too hard or serious. I told you about what the producer for Johnny Carson said in 1955. Said, "Johnny, give it up. You'll never be a prime time success. You just haven't got it. Come on, man. How many experts have written you off in some way in your life? And a lot of times they mean well, but I'm just saying that nobody knows about you except you, and it's just a matter of what we think about ourselves. And if we set little goals and achieve those goals, hey, we're going to make mistakes. I've made more mistakes per capita, per individual, than probably anybody here. But what makes you a success in life is that you get up every morning and you say it's a brand new day, and you got a plan. I mean, I've knocked on a lot of doors. I've gone to a lot of record companies, and I have been rejected. Probably out of the 100 times I've been rejected 97 times. I had three holds right now on the tape I'm going to play that could end up being rejections, but I never gave up. When I started in this business, I was very naive, very, very stupid. I didn't know what the right thing to do was. I followed my instincts, and so far I'm doing pretty good. But I had a lot of people tell me, and I told you about when I started the studio here in 69, 70, that people laughed. I mean, they meant well, too. These were good people, not my enemies. So what did I do in 1969? I called an expert. I called a guy who started a studio 6 miles over the hill, and he had failed at it. So I thought, well, I could maybe get some good advice from him. So I called him up. I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing a studio. What is your opinions? And he said, don't. He says, I lost all this money, and my wife don't like me no more, and my dog bit me in my leg. My daughter's getting birth control pills. She's 10 years old. I mean, she's getting I'm telling you something. I hung the phone up very sad, and it affected me because I believed him for about 3 minutes. I believed him. It affected me, and then at the same time, it made me realize, well, there's a difference between him and me, and that's me. I don't know about him, but I know the difference has got to be between me, and this is going to work. So that's the way it is. You got to decide what your steps are going to be. There aren't any big steps. There's just a whole bunch of little tiny things. There's a direction that you go. Being a producer is a kind of thing where you're either going to be starving yourself to death or you're going to be rich and famous. Being a producer is nobody pays you except to hit records. And let me tell you that the role of the producer is that he goes into the studio basically with a dream or with a conception of an idea in his mind, and he magically has got to pull all the personalities together. And the key to being a good producer is working with your musicians so that you don't carry a heavy authority over them. You know what I mean? It's like people will follow you if you work with them rather than them working for you. I don't like for anybody here to work for the workshop and to be afraid of the boss, because it shouldn't be that way. They should be willing to work with me, and it really works better that way. That way I don't have to watch anybody. You either get along with somebody and trust them, or you're all the time hound dogging them, make sure they're doing the right thing. And to me, it's just less energy to find the right personnel. If you got a band you're producing and you got a bass player that is never on time, he's a great bass player, but he's never on time, it's time to get a new bass player. You have to have a reliability factor with people, and working with your talent. Let's face it, most musicians have a basic neurotic condition. They're a little different from just the whole idea of them being a musician. And so just accept that as a fact, and know that you're dealing with a different breed of people. And at the same time, you got to be in charge as a producer. You can't be yielding to unfair demands, but at the same time, it's a very delicate balance in getting along with people. People will work with you if they respect you. And something, respect is an earned quality. You develop with people. They meet you, they're not going to respect you. for your qualities, they got to get to know you. And as a producer with a band or an artist, you become, it's a bit of a marriage, you know, it's a bit of a marriage. You go in and you work in a studio, and it's recording to me is an emotional, spiritual experience. My best times in my life have been in the studio, and it's I love it. And I think you will too if you get into it on a regular basis and realize you're working with people that are very unique. And what's really hard to do is when you're working with a musician who thinks he's Rod Stewart or something, you know, and the guy doesn't sound anything like, he's terrible, and the guy's on ego trip, you know, or the guy thinks he's Steve Gadd on the drums, but he misses a beat every measure, that kind of thing. That's really hard for me to work with a guy like that. Usually I'll, you know, if it's a self-contained band and they've hired me to do their thing, and I'll, you know, if I have just been hired to produce them, then I'll work with the guy as much as I can. You know, I won't try to change him because I know I can't, but at the same time, I'll try to tighten it up without being offensive. And if I need to point something out, it's basically working with what you got to work with. You're going to be getting your bands next week. They're going to come in, and some of them will probably be late. You know, we confirm them with the telephone 3 or 4 times and with a letter to be on time at such and such place, such and such studio. And we'll assign them to a studio, say Studio B. Well, they'll end up coming to Studio C a half hour late, no matter how many times you tell them. But that's just the nature of their profession, or them as people. And, you know, you got to learn to say, hey, okay, but let's hurry. You know, go to Studio B, you know, be there, get in there as quick as we can, we'll set up. And so these things will happen. We schedule the musicians, and as I told you before, there's all different styles, and there's all different trips these people are on, you know. People will come in, a lot of the new wavers, and it's a way of life with them. You know, their music, all of a sudden they've gone from this style to taking it real serious. They've changed their name, and they're into outrage, you know, and they're serious about it. It's fine. That's fine that they are. Just don't step on my toes or my neighbor's toes, and we'll get along. Basically, in the studio or here or anywhere, you got to have a basic respect for other people. I mean, think about. I mean, I don't want to be lecturing you here on life too much, but you know, like when you throw something down, you're driving down the road and you throw a paper cup out the window. You know, think about what you're doing, because you're creating a mess for other people. And I, you know, here we don't have a whole bunch of hard, fast rules, because it doesn't work that way. You really got to be into something, and you got to enjoy doing it. You can't make people do things. And when you're producing a record, you can't ride strong over the musicians. You got to be laid back, in my opinion. The best producers to me say very little. But at the same time, when there's something to be said, they say it. And it's a great feeling to take a raw song and take an arrangement, you go in there with the talent in a studio and end up with a tape or a record. To me, it's like being God. You know, you're creating something. And I've told you this before, that He's given us, our Maker has given us, that desire to be creative. And that's what making records is all about. Whether you're doing the design for the record jacket, or you're doing, you know, the remix, or whether you're doing the arrangement, or whether you're singing it, a song on the record, or whether you're playing a guitar line, whatever. It's a creative output. It's a channeling of what's in us, and you know, that's what makes it good. Even I'm making records now that have sold very little. I put out a couple of records here locally that it's not the world's greatest art or anything like that. I know it's not, and I'm taking it not so serious in that way. At the same time, it's important to me to give it a shot. I'm going to play you my tape here, and right now I'm real excited about it, because I've been involved as an engineer, as a producer for years, for 10 years. I've been doing other people's records. And finally, you know, I said to myself, after 10 years, I write songs, and, you know, you don't have to be a good singer to make records. I mean, just listen to the radio, okay? So, but I sang this song here, and I had a great time doing it. I've made a presentation to like 6 record companies, and I got 3 record companies that have held my tape. They said, we'd like it. You know, we're gonna let all the important people listen to it, as well as myself, presidents and vice presidents of the company. I mean, decisions today on records are based upon a committee vote. It's very rare does anybody have the power individually to sign you without consultation. So right now it's just all in a consultation stage. And it, you know, again, I'm not trying to be false in humility or anything, but I really feel that if preface the song, and I don't want to get too heady about it. I watched the film one time when about Israel. I'm not, this is not a political or religious song at all for me. But I saw this film about Israel, and it showed Israel, the desert of Israel, one of the deserts, and then it was like a before picture. So you know what I mean? And then they did an after picture, like when they got into the people got in and developed the land. They had orchards and everything, and that really impressed me. And they were trying to figure, the Jews in Israel were trying to figure. They had the water down here. They had a hillside that was real arid, and they was trying to figure out how to get the water up here. So what they did was they planted a tree right here, and there's plenty of water down here, but there's no water up here. So what they did was they planted another tree here, and they tied the roots together. You hip to that? And then they planted the tree and tied the roots together. And so they had a whole. I thought it was pretty unique, and I respected that. Anyway, I just saw this documentary on Israel as a nation. I just wrote them a song. So this is a country song, country anthem for Israel. Someone you want to hit the machine?
Gabriel, I know your voice. I'm looking on a Sunday morning, taking a jet from California. I'm going home to Israel. Going to land, I know I'll never be the same. I hear the thunder and the rain. That's what I think is I'm going back where my heart is riding on me. I'm going home where my heart died for me. Hey Gabriel, I'm almost there. Jets are moving through the air. In California's cold back there, and all I see is Israel. All I see is Israel. And I'm free to be Israel. Israel.
That not available in any store. You know, we have a limited edition Slim Whitman package with Joe Waters on KTEL Records. Now, was that a band sound or was that a produced sound?
Produce sound.
It was definitely produced. I don't have a band, you know. I just don't have a band. I just went in the studio. I introduced myself to the musicians. I said, "This is my song. This is the approach I want to take." And we cut the rhythm section, which is bass, drums, piano, guitar, maybe in 15 minutes. And it went down so quick that I felt bad because I always was used to working with bad musicians. It would take 3 hours to get something, you know. But did I tell you my experience in working with those guys? I went in there and the piano player was blind. Had all these beautiful lead sheets all written out, you know. All of them. And the guy was blind. I said, "Oh shit, what have I got?" I had about $10,000 in the session complete, $6,000 in escrow for the musicians, you know, the musicians hall. And the guy was blind. I mean, I about you know what I mean. The guitar player looked like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was about 60 years old, but man, he could play like a mother. I mean, he played these rhythm licks, these blues licks between my session and between these songs, and the guy was funky. I mean, he was an original funky Memphis musician. He played with Elvis, you know, in the early days of Jerry Lee Lewis when R&B was really, white R&B was really hot, you know. And this guy was a veteran, and it taught me a lot about studio. The guys come in, and they're real, you know, the bass player looked like an insurance salesman for Nationwide. You know. I mean, he was a real square looking guy. I was looking for somebody really hip looking, you know what I mean? Had long hair and was really clear, you know. But, hey, I'm not being flip, you know, people with long hair are cool too, you know. But I went for years and years, you know, I was, you know, in Matthewsville, I was the real weirdo for 5 years, 6 years, something like that. But you know, I'm just making a point here, and I don't want to be flip or smart about it. But basically, music is an inner thing. It's an inner expression. Doesn't matter what we look like. Doesn't matter what kind of music it is. If it's heartfelt and if it's played with feeling, then people don't like it. You know, polka music is big business. Anybody ever get into polka music? Polka records sell a lot of records. A lot of records. Dulcimer. Anybody into Dulcimer?
Yeah.
I did a Dulcimer record here that sold 20,000 copies. Now you say, well, that's not a big selling record. Well, you think when they sell them for $6 a piece themselves, and they sold 20,000, that's $120,000. Now they had overhead, so knock off. They made $100,000 off that record. Jay Giles' last album, their last album was, it cost them something like $300,000 to make it, and before they can even make a profit, they got 7 million records. So it's just what I'm saying is that your profit margin is what counts. You know, you're in a business. It's an industry. It's, you know, we're selling soap when we're selling records. We have to have an emotional feel what people like for them to invest the money in. And as a producer, you're really in between. You're in the middle, and people, they never see your face or anything so much on the record, but they see the group, and your name is usually on the record that you produced it. But although the consumer public may not know who you are, the record company executives do. Now, who hires the producer? Okay, let me get to this. The record producer is usually, today's record producer is what we call an indie, or an independent record producer. Okay? John Boylan, anybody know who you ever heard videos? Have you heard the name John Boylan?
Yeah.
He produced Boston's first big hit record, their last big hit record. So he produced Little River Band. To me, he's taken Little River Band, which is probably an average good group. They're good.
Yeah.
And he's made them international, you know, and they sell a lot of records. But John Boylan is an independent record producer. Peter Asher is an independent record producer. Phil Ramone is an independent record producer. All the great ones are independent. Now, years ago, say 1969 before, they all worked for the record companies, most of them. Okay? They were like a staff producer. But that's all changed. It's very rare now do the record companies have a staff producer. What they do is they engage an independent record producer. For example, George Martin at one time was a producer for EMI Records in England, right? Was that the label that deals with it? And he was their staff in-house producer, and anything that was going to be on that label, that he was to do was to stay on that label. It went to no other record company except those licensed to the other parts of the world. Yeah.
From some companies, like I think Epic does, which is a also controlled by CBS. Don't they insist on having somebody there though, or their own producers?
What they do now is they hire the producer. So the producer that for Boston, John Boylan on their first album, I think it's on Epic. Yeah, Epic engaged him. They said, John, we're hiring you to do this session to produce these guys and deliver us the tape by such and such, and that's it. And it's not unheard of that an executive will go and visit during a session.
Okay, but even as an independent, because he's hired by a company, he has to answer to like the executive producers
Right.
to get it pushed through the faster, right?
Right. But Bruce Harris, who's a vice president of A&R for Epic Records, was telling me that Boston had their tape really nice. They had nice tape, demo tapes that I can't remember the guy's name, Schultz. Tom Schultz. He produced the tape in his basement, had a 12-track Scully recorder. You know anything about tape recorders? It's like the Pinto of recorders. It's a real like recorder. But he liked it and he got a great sound on it for him. And he took the tape to everybody. Took it to Columbia, took it to Capitol, took it to Arista, took it to every record company, and they all turned him down. Said, no way. As soon as, nothing special. That's one of the phrases, it's nothing special. But this doesn't strike me. And anyway, they brought it back to Epic, and Epic signed it. It was the biggest selling debut album in history, 7.5 million copies. But, pardon me? Oh yeah, a lot of guys jump out of buildings. Happens all the time. Think about the guy that passed on the Beatles, huh?
They reduced it.
Yeah, think about the poor devil that passed on. Those guys have sold 500 million records worldwide. That's probably $1.5 billion or something. The guy lost for his company. I mean, there's no experts. Remember what I said? There's no experts. I went to one record company with that tape, and the guy says, MCA Records, this is the best tape I've heard in a year and a half. And he told me that. And I said, gee, and this guy was like a really, really great producer himself. And then I took it to Epic Records, which, it's got nothing to do with what we talked about before, but I took it to Epic album, and the guy said, well, this is outdated. This is outdated. Country's old, it's outdated. Here I am sitting in Century City, LA, plaza, which, all these buildings and everybody looks like Farrah Fawcett Majors or somebody, all the beautiful people out there. Here I am, a hillbilly from Ohio. This guy tells me my music's outdated, and I got to thinking, I mean, I don't sound like Charlie Daniels or anybody like that. I'm not, no one sounds alike, but I was thinking, country music's out, bullshit. I mean, the guy was coming to talk like the real expert, They got that, when they got that smell of an expert syndrome, man, I just, I don't let it get through me. But there's no other business like the music business. I mean, it's the only business that in 16 weeks you can rise from obscurity to fame. And the producer is really the talent maker. I mean, he gets the talent and he makes them work in the studio, and he's the kingpin. He really is. And the independent is the person that signs people today. Signs people today. Let me give you a figure that you won't believe. 50% of all new record releases come from an independent producer, even before the record company hears them. You know what I'm saying? The record companies only find out about the group or the artist through the independent producers who bring them projects. 50% of the new records you hear on Columbia Records, debut records, were not produced by Columbia. They were produced by an independent cat. We took them to Columbia. Columbia picked them up. They leased the master. Okay? Now, how many people here want to be producers? It looks like 25%, 1 in 4 maybe. One of the best ways to become an independent producer is just do what the United States of America did for England. Write out the Declaration of Independence and write it out and say, I hereby become an independent record producer. Okay? I'm telling you something that's very basic, but it's important. Declare yourself that and start being an independent record producer. Okay? Yeah.
How often do you find a producer that also has an engineer?
It's very rare. It's very hard to engineer and produce. There's a few. The guy that does the Eagles, Bill Simchick, he does. But I'm telling you, it's very tough. It's very tough. I've done it, and I do it from time to time. I don't mind doing it on overdubs, but on rhythm tracks, I prefer. Let me tell you what a good producer does in my opinion. A good producer, when he's producing, doesn't touch the knobs.
Yeah.
Just back off, let the engineer do it. First of all, you've mandated the guy to do a job, and you start messing with his knobs, you're in his territory. Your best thing to do is sit back here and listen, and stay out of the way as much as possible. I've learned this, but at the same time, be ready to make a point. It's good that a person doesn't speak much anyway, because people will pay more attention to you if you do, especially in a studio. The best thing to do is lay back and watch and let everybody do their thing. And when you feel like a change needs to be made, then you state it. And, you got a lot of, especially with amateur musicians, you got a lot of ego running around the studio. And you got to be very diplomatic. You get a lot of bands, like I said, come in here and they are so up on themselves and egotistical that, you just watch them and you're not sure how to handle it. And sometimes you just let them do it, and because what you say to them may cause a big row or some big fight. It's not worth it. Not worth it. Now, if your career is based on the performance of the band, you have a say about it. But otherwise, as an independent engineer or as an engineer working for a studio or as a producer that's been hired by the band, then you're going to be an employee for the band. But when you're hired by the record company, you're an employee for the record company. You understand the difference? Now, as an independent, small-time producer, you can start your own company, start your own production company. Remember what I said? 50% of all new records in the United States come from independent producers or independent production companies. And you can go in your community and look for a band or an artist that you believe in. Always look for a band that's got good songs, because the material is the number one thing that besides their performance. You can get a band that sounds great, they sound just like the record, but so what? I mean, if you want to hear a record, just turn the record on. You're looking for an original sound, and it's based on original material. Proposition that group. Tell them, say, look, I'll be your producer, and we will work together, and I'll make your tape, and I'll take it to a record company, and that's how you get your foot in the door. As far as being a producer, go make friends with people, make friends with as many record executives that you can. Take a good tape. If you go in a studio and cut 6 songs, you'll be lucky to get 2 or 3 really good ones. That's the way it goes. Did you read where Bruce Springsteen had 100 songs already recorded that millions heard? And then he just, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Boy, I'd like to get that tape. I'd be down in Kentucky in the hills with a tape duplicator. He's in Indiana, Kentucky someplace, back there behind the moon cranking out Bruce Springsteen tape. He's got 100 songs already recorded, Bruce has.
Yeah, right.
And he's got to pick out 7 of them for an album. Yeah.
Does the producer pick up the entire cost of a recording session?
No.
The band.
No. The producer is, well, in the case of where the record company engages the producer, the record company pays all the studio. But if it's an independent, yes. Or you can work a deal. Say, hey guys, I'll produce you. Let's co-op this thing. You guys put half in. I think that's a good way to do it for starting out. Unless you're independently wealthy and you can afford to take. Never gamble. Whether you're in Las Vegas or whether you're making records, which is the same thing, okay? Same damn thing, except that you can afford to lose. So I've had people that's come in and record, and the guy brings his wife and kids and says, I put my house up for sale. He says, I quit my job. I pulled all my savings out of the bank, and here it is. I want to do a session. I tell the guy, take your money back, go back, take your family back to the house, pay off your bills. When you can afford to record then. But don't do something stupid, Don't invest in a project unless you can afford the loss. Jim Croce got signed by 2 guys, Cashman and West. They paid the whole tab. They paid the whole tab. And they recorded like 3 albums. Took them 3 albums worth of material to get their first deal. They got turned down by everybody too. So the way the record business is, the guys that sign you up don't always have the eyes and ears to know that you're a major talent. You have to persist and hang in there, and as a producer, make as many friends as you can with people, because the day will come where you've made that acquaintance and it will come back to you. It's like, you know what a lobbyist is? In Washington, you have these lobbyists who are engaged by interest groups who send them to Washington to influence congressmen, you know, and they're illegal and everything. And their whole gig is to petition the congressman to say, hey, you know, we don't want guns controlling the United States because, you know, the communists would be coming down through Canada pretty soon and getting us, you know what I mean? So, I mean, their whole gig is to promote an idea. And that's what you have to do with yourself always. You have to promote yourself all the time. Yeah.
You said if you're gonna go to like Capitol, you go, yes. How many do we? You go to the president's office.
Boy, if you can, let me tell you what I did. Let me tell you what I did. When I was 19 years old and produced my first record, I thought it was great. You know, I was, man, this is the greatest thing. I don't know, see, Simon and Garfunkel. Anyway. So what I did was I got a Simon and Garfunkel or Bob Dylan album, and I started reading in the back of it. You know, I always read the back cover. It said John Hammond. Oh, you hit the John Hammond.
Yeah, yeah.
So like a fool, I called Columbia Records and said, let me talk to John Hammond. All right? John Hammond, big executive, president of A&R for CBS Records, famous guy, you know, famous, authentic hero type. I mean, a legend. So what did they do? They rang up John Hammond's office, and what did I do? I said, this is Joe Waters. And what did he do? He talked to me. I mean, what was he proud of? Why did we have to talk together? And like a fool, I said, I'm coming to New York and I want to see you. I like to schedule an appointment. He was so taken by my ignorance that he scheduled an appointment with me. That's the goodness. I mean, I didn't know any better. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to call this famous guy. So I hopped on a plane, went to New York, went to see him. I spent all day with the man. Became fast, good friend. And amazing, you know. I mean, it's just amazing. And I did that when I was 19. That was like a very incredible experience in my career. Well, that's been a long time ago, as you can tell. And, but a couple of years ago, I was going to go back to New York, and I went to see him. And his attorney and my attorney, his name is William Kozlowski. He wrote a book called This Business of Music. And Bill Kozlowski's a really nice guy and everything. Real lawyer. A music lawyer is a paid paranoid. Remember that. Paid paranoid, and you got to have them because they look for your own good, you know. Because a record company can cheat you in their accounting. Oh, I forgot to add this in. You know, got your percentage. Joan Baez was cheated out $16,000 because of an accounting error. You know, oh, we made a slight mistake. You know, just Bill Kozlowski, a lawyer, you know, to audit their books and everything. But so I went to see my friend Bill Kozlowski. I was talking to him about some stuff. I said, well, he said, what are you going to do today? I said, well, I thought I'd call John Hammond up and go see him. He says, there's no way that you're going to even reach him on the phone. He says, he won't even talk to me. I'm his lawyer. So I got the Manhattan phone book out, and there's two John Hammonds, and one of them is near Central Park, and one of them is somewhere on 12th Street, and I figured it wasn't that. So I called up. I said, John, let me talk to John Hammond. And his wife says, John, we come to the phone, and sure enough, it was the John Hammond. And I hadn't talked to him for 10 years. And I told him, he remembered me. He said, sure, I'll see him. So I went to see him and had a good time. And you know, it was you know, it was much as me just seeing him, just to be with him was, you know, he's really retired, but I just wanted to see him. See, when I told Carl Lobster later that I saw him, he was mad and jealous, you know. But you got to be crazy and gutsy and naive, you know, and that's how you're gonna win. You're not gonna listen. Remember what I said about the expert? The expert said, "He's my friend. You can't do that. You can't reach him. I can't even reach him. I'm his own lawyer. You're not even. You know.
Who are you?
Yeah, who are you from Ohio?" I love to be underestimated. Just remember that. That's an advantage. Let people underestimate you. What time we got? 20 after?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go over 6 very important points that I'm going to leave with you. Now, a lot of this stuff I'm giving you is quick, and it's going to be hard to understand as to how it applies to your session until you start doing sessions. But I want to give you these techniques. These are techniques of listening, called 6 criteria of production listening. I figured these out myself, but it's something I've learned, and they work really good. These are 6 criteria, the 6 T's I call them. You can learn these 6 T's, you're going to be making it real. You can learn them and apply them. First T. When you're listening to a playback, you have always got to, first of all, listen for tightness. Tightness. How tight is that track? Tightness means rhythmic accuracy, precision of accuracy, precision of playing together. Being able to listen to the rhythm, to know that it's played accurately. That's tightness. No matter what speed of the song or anything, it's the idea of the musicians or the section playing together. If it's not tight, it's loose, right? If it's loose, it can be a really beautiful take, but that can ruin the whole track. Okay, number 2 thing you listen for is tempo. As a critic, as a producer, you are a critic, and you're to always listen for what's wrong with this take before you listen to what's right about it. Okay, I know it sounds negative, but it's not, because once you get past the idea of if what's wrong with it, then you'll get into what's right about it, and it will even be better. The tempo. Is this the tempo? You say to you, this is rhetorical. Is this the tempo that carries the feeling of the song across? Is this the tempo that conveys the musical idea? Okay, and you say to yourself, I've heard it. Yeah, it is. So that's the second T. The tempo. Is this the right speed? You have to determine the basic speed of the song. Now, the tempo, as you further describing it, carries a very important factor in your song, and that is feeling. Okay, so your tempo is your feel, as much as the mathematical carrying on of the song, the time format of it, the tempo. Remember what they say on Dick Clark? I like the record. Why do they like the record? He's got a good beat I can dance to, right? I give it a 90. I've never watched a show where they didn't say that as the answer. Ever since 1964, I've been watching that show. Well, even before that, I was in 7th grade. Yeah, they were saying it back then, when they were in Philadelphia, and it was really good in those days. But you got your tightness, you got your tempo. Next item, next T is tuning. You've got to continually, as a producer, judge the tuning quality of your musicians. Tuning is very important. How many times have you heard a good record that the guitar was out of tune? Lots. Now, you're going to be getting a lot of self-contained bands come in, and you're going to try to tell them as much as possible to tune up, but it reaches a point with self-contained bands, unless you're a hired producer, it's really going to be, they're going to do it the way they want to do it anyway, right? Okay, let's admit that a lot of sessions are like that. The band's in charge of their own session, and you may be the technical producer, but at the same time, you got to realize that you will just met these people, and it's going to be hard to tell them how to play the music. But you can be suggestive and say, listen, your guitar's out, tune it out. Now, let me tell you how to tune, basically. I could spend a whole lecture just on this alone. Basically, figure out what the most important instrument is. Let's say it's a keyboard, piano. The most important instrument in the song that will be heard all the way through most of the time would be piano. So assuming that your piano is in tune, everybody should tune to the piano, right? Right. That's the basic. Tune to the dominant instrument. But here's the real important factor, is that you tune together. Tune together. So that the guitar player is tuning to the organ or the piano along with the bass guitar player. They're all tuning together at the same time. Okay, and let me give you a brief explanation why it should be this way. You ever notice orchestras do that? They all because of a what's the original? Let's say middle A is 440, right? 400 cycles per second is middle A on the piano. Agree? We could be like our race and argue about that, but let's agree. Let's agree. Being human, we tend to disagree, but let's agree. 440 cycles per second is the middle A on the piano. Now the ear can tell plus or minus 2 cycles. So if the piano is in tune at 440 and I tune my guitar, let's say at 438.5, the ear can hear plus or minus 2, right? I tune my guitar This is a guitar here. It's at 438.5. I tuned it to the piano, which is 440. It'll sound pretty good, no? You remember the ear can tell about two, but not within two. Okay? Now here's why it's important that everybody tune the piano. I mean, everybody tune together to the piano. What would happen if the piano player says, well, I've got to go to the John, I'll be gone. And the bass player says, well, I got to tune up. And he'll say, well, tune to the guitar player. Right?
Yeah.
So the bass man, I'll just write bass names because I can't draw bass. The bass man tunes up to the guitar player, and he comes in at about 437. Sounds pretty good, right? So him and the guitar player jamming, man, they sounded good. They're getting awesome. The piano player comes back from John, sits down at the piano, starts playing. What happened? Sounds bad. Why? The difference is between the bass guitar and the piano is 3 sideways, and the ear hates that. It drives you crazy. And like the Rolling Stones have been 5 cycles out of tune before on the early record. He forgave them, didn't we? But so what happens? What the correct way of doing it, in my opinion, is for the guitar player to tune to the piano player, right? Which he did pretty good. But then the bass player should tune to both, right? So chances are, tuning to both, they'll come in at probably 439. And then the flute player comes in, Jethro Tull comes in. It's like a Jethro Tull band. They come in, they say, okay, well, I want to tune my little flute up here. So they should tune to who? Who should the flute player tune to? All of them. So they should tune to all of them. And then that way you're doing it as a group. You're tuning as a group. Okay, tuning. Very important. Very important. The next item in your record that you're listening for is texture. Texture. You're listening for texture. The definition of texture is the unique quality that makes this artist special. I call it a sound signature. If you had Kansas playing Mary Had a Little Lamb, you would know that it was Kansas, right? Because of their arrangement style and the way they do things. So as a producer, you have always got to maintain your artist's authenticity and their touch, right? There's certain sound signature. Very important. What happens if a band changes their sound signature from album to album too much? The public gets confused, and you start your following starts, saying, hey, these people don't sound like they did on the first record. I don't like them.
There are some artists who use that all the time. They change a lot from album to album. David Bowie doesn't sound pretty much the same from one album to the other.
Well, his voice is still his. And the thing is, writing his own material, I mean, you get exceptions to the rule, but this one, it's a little different with a particular individual as it is with a band. But you'll notice that the Beatles, when they changed, they did it gradually. Like they would change within 2 or 3 albums. I mean, they go 2 or 3 albums with the same quality, and even right up to the very end in their last album, they still had their elements of the early sound. So it's just I don't know. People will latch on to certain groups because of certain qualities, and it's just a fact. I mean, if they change too dramatically, the Byrds were an amazing group, and they changed a lot. And, they went full circle. But something, up to the very end, they were not extremely popular. That's a fact. Even though they represented one of the most progressive groups ever for being the first to do certain type of things. But they didn't, they really lost their following. I mean, I'm not saying it should be that way. I'm just saying that's the way it is. You've got to be a bit repetitive with your qualities. All right. So we're talking about sound signature and the texture. That is 4 items so far. Okay. The next thing you listen for as a producer is tone. Now, tone, I put it that way because just to make it cleverly fit with the T idea. Tone means the sound. As a producer, you've got to continually scrutinize the sound quality. As to, you may have a perfect drum sound for the way you want it. The musicians will take a break, and the drummer will come back and he'll bump a mic, unwittingly. They'll sit down and start playing, and it won't sound the same. But it's got to be up to you as a producer to catch that. You see what I'm saying? So the sound or the tone is something that you have continually got to listen for because it will change. You know, humidity will change the sound of your drum set. I come in and did a session one time. I was going to do the perfect drum sound. Spent hours. Had the mics all set up. Perfect drum sound. I was going to be ready for my session the next day, right? Come in the next day. It sounded awful. Nothing had been changed. The humidity had to be. Or I don't know, maybe it was sunspots. I don't know. Something changed it. But a sound is a very tentative thing. Very tentative. Okay, we got 5 keys. Yeah. The
Yeah.
6th key is the most important key for me, and that's touch. It's got to have the artist's touch. It's got to have the essence of energy, communication, of the feeling of that individual.
Producer or the person doing the record?
The artist's got to have that, and as a producer, you've got to continually listen for that. Whether you're doing one particular take, say you're doing a vocal overdub, you've got to continually listen for that feeling. Please. Texture is their basic instrumentation sound. It's basically their arrangement and their tone has taken the voicing of their instruments. You know, like in Kansas they use that fiddle. That's part of their texture. The harmony of sticks, their high vocal harmony. That's their texture. The lead voice of Rush, the high, he got things real high. Anytime he could sing a Pepsi commercial, you know it was him because of his texture. He had something about him. Bob Dylan, you know, Bob Dylan could sing Yesterday with the London Symphony, and you would know that it was him because of his uniqueness. Texture is uniqueness. Touch that fully expressed emotion. It's the emotional experience you get from having heard the texture. Okay. Touch is the emotional experience of having experienced the texture of the artist. 138. Okay. Okay, now please keep your notes good because after you leave the workshop, I want you to take your notes with you, of course, and you'll continue to study it. If you master these, for me to come where I'm at now, it's taken me a long time. It took me 3 years to judge perfect continuous. I wasn't born with it, I had to practice. So anytime you listen to a record on the radio or doing a playback in the studio, use the 17.